I was 19, that strange age where you're technically an adult, but still too young to realize how unsafe the world can be when the sun goes down. I lived alone in a small apartment just outside downtown Minneapolis. Nothing fancy, a creaky bed, a microwave that wheezed every time it ran, and a second-hand couch I bought off a guy who smelled like paint thinner. But it was mine. My first real taste of independence. I didn't own a car. Couldn't afford one. So every day, I used the bus. It was fine, most days, at least. Until you had to transfer at Nicollet Mall. Now, if you've never been there, let me paint a picture. Nicollet Mall isn't really a mall, it's a long, wide avenue downtown that only buses can use. The rest of the city hums with traffic, but here, it's just you, the bus shelters, and whatever decides to crawl out after dark. During the day, it's crowded and loud, people laughing, eating, shopping. At night, it becomes something else entirely. Still. Hollow. Like the city holds its breath. That night, I had just left the hospital. My mom had been sick for weeks, and I'd stayed late, talking to her until she drifted off to sleep. By the time I walked out, the sky was already black, that heavy kind of darkness that feels endless. I checked my watch. Almost midnight. The buses ran slower at that hour, so I braced myself for a long wait. When I got to Nicollet Mall, it was empty. Not quiet, empty. No cars. No voices. Just the echo of my footsteps bouncing off the glass walls of the bus shelter. I stepped inside, grateful for the bright fluorescent light above. It buzzed like a dying insect, flickering just enough to make the shadows move. The plexiglass walls were scratched with graffiti, little words left behind by other people who'd been alone there once too. I sat on the cold metal bench, hugging my coat tighter. My phone had only 5% battery left. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't. I just wanted to get home. That's when I saw him. A tall man, maybe late 30s, maybe older, walking down the middle of the empty street. Long coat. Fast strides. No hesitation. He wasn't stumbling like a drunk, and he wasn't wandering like a lost person. He moved like he knew exactly where he was going. Right toward me. My heartbeat picked up. My stomach twisted. I told myself not to panic, maybe he was just cutting through. But then he locked eyes with me. And didn't look away. I gripped my phone inside my pocket. My fingers brushed the cold case like it was a weapon. My brain screamed to move, but my body wouldn't. He came closer. 10 feet. 5 feet. And then he stopped, right outside the shelter. The light reflected off the glass, so for a second, I could only see his outline. Then he took one step closer, leaned forward. And with one violent motion, flung his coat open. It took me a second to understand what I was seeing. And then it hit me. He was exposing himself. Right there. In the middle of downtown. The world froze. My breath caught in my throat. Every muscle in my body locked up. This wasn't happening. Not here. Not to me. For a split second, my brain scrambled for every safety lecture I'd ever heard. Don't engage, look away, run, scream, stay visible. But I didn't do any of that. I just laughed. A short, sharp sound that burst out of me before I could stop it. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't confidence. It was pure, terrified disbelief turned inside out. He blinked. He wasn't expecting that. I looked right at him, my voice shaking but somehow steady enough to say, "Yup. That looks like a penis, only smaller." The words just came out. Not planned. Not filtered. Instinct. His face changed instantly. The power drained from him like someone had pulled the plug. He gasped, yanked his coat shut, hunched over, and then ran. Just like that. The big, confident man who'd walked like he owned the street was now sprinting into the dark, coat flapping behind him. And I just stood there. Heart pounding. Hands trembling. I should have been crying. But I wasn't. I felt powerful. The next morning, I still couldn't believe it happened. I replayed every detail, the coat, the look on his face, the sound of his footsteps fading away. And that line. That stupid, fearless, perfect line. At first, I thought I'd embarrassed myself. That maybe laughing was the wrong reaction. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was the only reaction that worked. He wanted fear. He wanted control. He wanted to see that look, the one that says, "You scared me." But he didn't get that. He got laughter. He got humiliation. And that's what cowards like him can't handle. A few days later, I told my mom what happened. She covered her mouth, horrified. But then she laughed, softly, like she couldn't help herself. She said, "That's my girl. You laughed in the face of evil." That line stuck with me. Because that's exactly what it was. Evil isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it wears a coat. Sometimes it walks right up to you and expects you to flinch. But when you don't, when you look it in the eye and laugh, it loses its shape. Weeks passed. I told a few close friends. One of them gasped, then grinned. "You laughed? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "And he ran like hell." She burst out laughing. "Good. That's what he gets." Later that night, she texted me. "I told my roommates your story. We all decided that's the energy we need. No more freezing, no more fear." I didn't know what to say. Because suddenly, I realized something. My reaction, that random, ridiculous laugh, had turned into something more. It wasn't just survival. It was inspiration. A week later, I was at a campus event when a stranger walked up to me. She smiled and said, "You're the bus stop girl, right?" I hesitated. Maybe?" She laughed. "Yeah, it's you. You're kind of a legend. You made that creep run." I didn't know whether to be proud or embarrassed. But deep down, I was proud. Because what happened that night wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who'd ever walked faster down a dark street. Every girl who'd ever crossed her arms tighter and pretended not to notice. Every person who'd ever felt powerless. Now, the story was theirs too, and maybe, for a few of them, it meant they didn't have to feel small anymore. And here's the twist, a few days later, I found out that man had been seen flashing other women around Nicollet Mall before. Someone finally filed a report. But after that night, he was gone. Vanished. No one ever saw him again. Maybe he moved. Maybe he finally realized that the city he thought was full of victims wasn't afraid of him anymore. Either way, he disappeared the night I laughed. Months passed. Life went on. But every time I took that route, I'd look at the same plexiglass shelter. The flickering light was still there. The bench still cold. But it didn't scare me anymore. That place, the one where I thought I'd break, became the place where I took my power back. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the glass and barely recognize myself. That scared girl was gone. In her place stood someone new. Someone who had faced something ugly and refused to let it win. One night, months later, I saw another girl waiting at that same stop. She looked about my age, nervous, fidgeting, glancing down the street every few seconds. For a moment, I almost walked away. Then I stopped. I walked up and smiled. She looked surprised, but she smiled back. We didn't say a word. We didn't have to. It was the kind of unspoken connection that only women who've been afraid can understand. Like saying, "You're not alone anymore." And somehow, that felt like closure. Now, looking back, I realize that night taught me something I'll never forget. Fear only wins when you let it. People like him, they depend on silence, on shame, on the idea that you'll freeze and give them what they want, control. But when you refuse, when you turn their twisted game into a joke, you take that control back. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I laughed. And that laugh echoed louder than any scream ever could. Sometimes, revenge isn't loud. It's not fire or fury. It's a small act of courage that flips the script completely. Because monsters aren't always beaten with fists. Sometimes they're defeated by a smile, the kind that says, "You don't scare me anymore." That's how I won. At a bus stop. In the middle of the night. With nothing but fear in my chest and laughter on my lips. If you've ever been scared, humiliated, or made to feel small, remember this: you don't need to shout to reclaim your power. Sometimes the quietest sound, a laugh, a smirk, a calm stare, is what destroys evil the fastest. Because fear feeds on reaction. But courage laughs. And when it does, monsters run. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to hit that like button. It tells me you believe that bravery doesn't always roar. Comment below, I would have laughed too. And subscribe for more Reddit revenge stories, where karma doesn't scream, it just smiles back.